Hi, I'm Colette here on my Which Ways channel, talking today about deity. This is part 2 of a series on deity, working with deity, if that's right for you. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about who might be calling you, how to know if you're being called, and some very broad categorizations around types of deity to help you understand who you might be working with. Enjoy the video and like and subscribe. So the first question a lot of people ask is whether or not deity is calling to you. And that is something only you can decide, and only you can decide whether or not you want to answer that call. So maybe one way that shows up for you is simply as an inner knowing or a resonance of that idea, kind of being like, yeah, I like that idea. I feel an affinity for that idea. I'm drawn to that idea, just kind of a little bit of resonance with it. And then you can explore it further and decide if you want to go on in that way. Another way that you might know that deity is calling to you, or you might have an affinity for that work, is that the topic keeps just coming up in various ways. It's just that thing that kind of keeps tugging, that little signs, importance, omens kind of thing, where that just keeps coming up. And often when you do answer that call and get to know a deity, you'll find that there were maybe even more things showing up that you hadn't registered, like working with underworld deities and crows and underworld creatures being more predominant than usual as you walk around in your life. Another really good way to start to feel the call to deity is through dream work. I've had several dreams about deity, and even if they weren't deity that I decided ultimately to work with, I felt like I had a much better understanding about who they were, and it really broadened my concept of deity and its place in the culture today. Let's start with the idea that you are being called and you feel a little tug. How do you know who is calling you and what they're like? I'm going to give you a couple of suggestions of ways you might try to find out. What I would suggest as one method is to take some time to sit quietly in a place where you won't be disturbed. Feel the earth below you, the sky above you, and feel connected to that and held. Cast a circle of protection around you. I have a video on that if you don't know how to cast a circle. And then there's a few different techniques depending on how you get information psychically to try. So the first one is to ask to see a picture of the being that is calling to you. That might work, that might not. If you get something, write it down. You can ask if they have a name that they're willing to give you. That might work, that might not. It just really depends on the way you get information. The thing that I find that is most universally available to people is to, when they're in that quiet place, to just soften and let their mind drift a little and just be open to imagining and feeling information about that being come up however it wants to. That might be sensations, it might be memory, it might be scent, it might be pictures, it might be qualities or words. It could be like golden, water, sunset, soft, velvet, like those kinds of qualities. And so that tends to work for a lot of people once you can kind of let go of your self-consciousness. And write those down, or remember them and write them down after let go of your circle. and then you can assess. So what do you do with that info? If you got a picture or image, you can see if you recognize that particular image and know who that deity is. If not, write down the characteristics of what they looked like. Were they old or young? What kind of landscape were they in? What kind of clothes were they wearing? What was your emotional response to them? And then just record that and set that aside to research deities that might match that particular way of being. The other thing is, if you get a name, research that name and see if it's an actual deity. And if it's not, what does that name bring to mind? Do some journaling about what you associate, what that name reminds you of, what do you think it might be like, anything to kind of free up your intuition. If you get a whole bunch of qualities, you can start researching deities that fit that particular quality. Sometimes people ask me, well, what do I do if a deity shows up that's not from my lineage and I want to be respectful? I don't have the perfect answer to that. What I know how to do is to say, thank you, I see you, thank you for showing up for me. And then I might research whether the people of that being need some particular support right now. And that might be financial support, or it might be some other thing. And so that's a couple of ways to work with that. I'm sure there are others. So if you have a feeling or some information about deity or a being that keeps coming to you, there are a couple of simple ways to categorize deities overall. Some deities defy categorization, but here's some ways that you might get started. Or if you are like, I want to work with a deity like this, this might be helpful to you. So one of the ways that I was taught was sort of the trinity of deity, which when it's gendered as female is maiden, mother, and crone. So a deity might be one of those particular types of deity. So for instance, if the deity that showed up for you was very young, you could research maiden deities of your lineage. Some deities embody all three, and for me, I always take that as a sign that they are a very, very, very old goddess. A non-binary version of that is, I like to think of youth, sovereign not as ruler, but sovereign as in sovereign in and of yourself, and sovereign in belonging to the land as sort of that middle phase of life, and wise one as elder, for a non-binary version of that, because I think a lot of non-binary qualities around deity have been lost and they're just starting to come back to us. If you're looking for a male deity, or a male deity shows up to you, the sort of young version of that triplicity might be lover, consort. That middle age range might be referred to as a hunter god, or a warrior god, or a being of the wild. That older male deity might be referred to as sage or hermit. And so you could research those kinds of deities. Age range and how they appear can be a really important clue to who they are. Another sort of way of categorizing deity and helping to figure out who they are is the triplicity of overworld, middle world, and underworld. So overworld deities might be deities who traditionally were seen as residing above in the heavenly realms or the astral realms. They might be beings who are associated with stars, with the sun, or with the moon. Those are all things to notice about a deity and to do some research on. Middle world deities might be considered deities of the land, deities who are associated with agriculture, with gardening, with farming, with skills, having given particular crafts to people, beings who are associated with the woods or animals are all considered to be of that middle realm of deity. And then below the underworld is deities who are associated with the deeps, the mountain roots, death, destruction, compost, regeneration, divination, renewal. Those often are underworld deities. So some clues to that might be the kind of clothes you saw them wearing, or the qualities, or maybe there were animals that showed up when you asked that question in association with them. All those things might be clues to what kind of being that they are. That might be enough to start, and you can research your lineage, your ethnicity, for descriptions of a being that fits some of those parameters. I'll put a link in the description below the video to a Google Doc that will talk about the various categories I just went over and the types of magic that each of those specific categories are drawn to and have provenance over. You also, of course, might just see a name or read a story about a particular deity and feel really drawn. And that's fine. Just take it from there and do some more research and start a relationship if that feels right. A lot of people today, understandably, don't want to work with deity because they feel like it's an authority over them kind of issue. And that's an interesting concept, because one of the things I see being 65 is that our ideas around deity really change over time. For example, in Roman times, they did not see deity as morally superior or ethical in any way. They were just kind of like really powerful humans having the same squabbles and jealousies that humans have. They did not see them as morally superior. When I started witchcraft, working with deity, particularly working with goddesses, was seen as very subversive, as a way to overthrow the dominant paradigm of hierarchical religions, and even people who weren't particularly spiritual at all, were way into the goddess just because it was seen as a way to overthrow authority. And I was always taught that deity is part of you. You are deity. There's a spark inside of you that is deity and embodies that. It's not something that's a power over you. But as I said, our ideas around deity change over time. Once you've found a deity, or maybe a category of deities that you'd like to start working with, just check in and make sure it feels right for you and authentic. If it's not quite right, try some honoring work and see where that goes. You can also just let things rest and trust that more info will come to you over time. Deities are very long-lived beings, and one of the things they can teach us is to be patient and to let relationships develop over a long period of time. So once you have found the name of a deity that feels right to you, you can start to solidify the relationship. You can work with multiple beings. You can work with just one. That's a personal choice. It will evolve over time for you, and what is the right way for you to proceed will show up if you keep showing up. So a few ways to go a little deeper is to just start with honoring them, with making offerings, building them altars with colors and objects that they might like, burning candles to them. And once you feel solid and comfortable with that, you can start to call on them. And so that might look like calling them into a circle of magic when you're doing a spell or a working or a ritual, and just inviting them by saying their name, calling them in, naming a few of their qualities, saying how much you honor them, and welcoming them. It can be super simple. I think I gave an example of that in last week's video. And then remember to thank them, make an offering, and let them go when you are done with your magic. Once you have a bit of established relationship, you can start working with deity for things that you need in your life. And there's a long tradition in certain kinds of witchcraft that involve that. And there's a lot of different approaches. I'll try and give a couple different ones. Some are really just straightforward. Many witchcraft traditions feel like the more straightforward you are, the better. It's like, I need X and I need it by this date. Thank you, goddess, or thank you, God. That's one approach. Another way, and this is actually the way I was taught, is to not be too specific, to not just be like, oh, I need rent for this month, which might be the direct method, to just say, I need rent for this month. Sometimes that's real effective. But to be more broad, to be asking for a broader financial security and a stable home situation. And I was also taught to, when you ask specifically for something, to say, I ask for this or better. And then thank them and make an offering. And that's a very condensed version of how you ask deity for help. If you have questions, put them in the comments below. I could do a very in-depth workshop on the ways to do that, or a whole hour-long video on that. Maybe someday I will, who knows? And the last thing I want to say is, again, to remember that this takes time. To be patient with yourself, be patient with the spirit world. These are long-lived beings, some of whom time doesn't even register for them. So be patient, take care of yourself, be respectful, make offerings, and let things flow as they need to. Thanks for watching. Remember to hit the like and subscribe button. That helps me keep doing these videos. Take care of yourselves, be safe, and be well.